So the self-conscious emotions, guilt, shame, um, embarrassment, and which are of course have a negative valence to them, and pride, which is generally a positive experience as a response to something positive that's happened to us. All of these, the idea is that these are called self-conscious emotions because how can I feel guilty about something that I did, or shame about something that I did, or feel embarrassed for some social blunder that I performed, or pride in something, admirable that I did? How can I do that if I don't even understand that I'm a thing, that I have a sense of self? And so these are called sort of examples of secondary emotions because, you might be familiar in the developmental research, sort of an old way of that researchers used to test whether or not an infant had developed a sense of self. We actually use this on primates too. Is that whether we can, they call it the ruse test. And the idea is that, very young children, infants, and, up to toddlers, until about, I can't remember what about the age is that children start to pass the ruse test, but they would put rouge on a little child's face and then put them in front of the mirror. And the idea is that if you look in the mirror and understand that you're a thing, that you're looking at yourself in the mirror, you should reach and wipe it off with your face. If you don't understand that what you're looking at is yourself and that you're an entity, you're too young for that, you haven't developed a sense of self, then you'll reach for the mirror and try and touch the red makeup on what you believe is another person's face. So same thing happens with primates, as a matter of fact, too. There does come a point where they stop reaching for the mirror and they start looking at themselves. And the idea is that they've developed a sense of self. So these emotions would require, for example, you being able to pass that test. And that test takes some time. And so that's why these are considered secondary emotions. And there's another reason why they're considered secondary emotions is because these can be more or less, it's not so much like any of these guilt, shame, pride, or embarrassment would be maybe absent in a particular culture. But you can imagine, I think it's not hard to imagine how they could be hypercognized or hypocognized. So encouraged to be enhanced or encouraged to be suppressed. Cultural display rules, depending on the culture that you're a member of. So hence these are all in emotions that involve essentially an evaluation of the self, and more specifically the relations to others, right? I'm embarrassed because I've made a social blunder. I feel shame because I've done something, really bad to another person, or guilt because I've done something bad to another person. I feel pride because maybe I beat you in a sporting event. So relations to others, okay? And so these are likely limited to humans that have achieved some level of psychological development, specifically a level where they, have a sense of self. And not surprisingly, considering they're really all about our relations to other people, these certainly seem to be more about the social functions of emotion as opposed to and so serve us indirectly, right? Sort of to repair relations with other people. And so later on, if I've done a wrong to someone, I've shown them that I realize that I've shown them a shame expression, or a guilt expression, or an embarrassment expression, what have you. And so those signs are show, they act to hopefully and generally do repair the social damage that I've done. And so they're more likely to serve a social function, an interpersonal function, than an intrapersonal function, or what Reeve referred to as a coping function. Okay. Specific. So I'm going to talk about embarrassment, shame, and guilt sort of kind of all together, and then but it certainly distinguish those three from pride. Embarrassment, shame, guilt, they have much in common. They all make us feel bad. They're experiencing them, subjectively. It doesn't feel good to be embarrassed. It doesn't feel good to be guilty or feel shameful. They reflect the belief that we've done something wrong. Now, that might have been an accident. That's going to be embarrassment, a social blunder. But they might actually be, I've done something wrong, and to someone else. I've had inflicted damage to someone else. And then that might initiate, depending on whether I believe it was just a reflection of my behavior, I'd feel guilt. If I believe that's a reflection of me, like I'm a bad person, I'm likely to feel shame. But the idea is that all three of these are, they feel very similar. And they motivate us to generally motivate us to sort of want to pull away. I'm embarrassed, shame, or guilt. I want to get out. I want to get out of this uncomfortable situation. I want to get out of the person that I've that is related to this event. I want to get out of their way. And the experience of embarrassment and guilt even activate the same neural areas. These are participants that were asked to read sentences that would, or were meant to elicit embarrassment, or would be guilt eliciting, should it induce guilt, sort of make us feel like it was about guilt. And these are fMRI. This is where the brain areas are active when they're feeling guilt compared to reading a neutral sentence, and embarrassment compared to a neutral sentence. And you can see the overlap is quite considerable. Right and left frontal, right and left frontal, and right and left back here, and sort of looks like occipital temporal. But anyway, regardless of the exact areas, you can see that there's a lot of overlap, and so they feel the same in terms of the aspect of the emotion, the subjective component of it. They feel the same, and we're seeing in terms of neural activation a lot of overlap. So in short, emotional experiences of embarrassment, guilt, we didn't see shame there, but they all overlap considerably in terms of how they feel, and even in the brain. The kinds of experiences that elicit embarrassment, shame, and guilt also overlap to the same degree, to a similar degree. For example, shame and guilt are both commonly experienced when we've hurt others in some way. I'm going to come back to this again, but what I said earlier is these are very similar, shame and guilt, and how researchers distinguish them is I tend to feel guilt if I feel like I've done something wrong, but it was just a bad move. It was just some bad behavior, some regrettable behavior that makes me feel guilty, but it's not a reflection of me. Like, I'm not necessarily a bad person. I'm more likely to feel shame, researchers say, when I interpret my bad behavior as not just a bad move that might have had a negative consequence for another person, but that this behavior that has occurred is shameful because it's a reflection of me. Okay. So I've done wrong, but it was just a bad move, guilt. I've done wrong, and it means I'm a bad person, shame. Okay. And embarrassment is somewhat unique from those other two, because embarrassment doesn't necessarily have anything to do with hurting anyone else. It can be embarrassed if I've sort of done something an ill to another person, but embarrassment is actually not necessarily imply I've done anything wrong. It's actually, embarrassment is mostly elicited when I am unexpectedly become the unwanted center of attention. Surprise birthday party or whatever it might be, or as well, not only it's kind of related to that, when I perform a sort of a social blunder, right? I trip and drop all my books, right? I've suddenly become the unwanted center of attention if I believe other people have seen this, right? That's embarrassing, but I haven't done anything to you. I haven't done anyone else any wrong. And so that's how it's distinguished from shame and guilt. I haven't hurt others in any necessarily hurt anyone else. Okay. So what elicits embarrassment? As I mentioned, I violated a social convention. Maybe I don't know, maybe I farted in an elevator or something. That would certainly probably be embarrassing. But as I mentioned, it's about becoming the unwanted, unexpected and unwanted center of attention. And typically when I'm embarrassed, maybe I'm in a grocery store and I walk into a display aisle and knock over a bunch of boxes of Kraft Dinner or something like that. My sign of embarrassment is a signal to others that I recognize that I've done wrong, and like, I'm sorry. And so my signal of embarrassment, which can be enhanced, of course, with the blush response, is a signal to others that I recognize I've done wrong, I'm sorry, and hopefully you'll go lighter on me because it wasn't intentional. All right, so it occurs when I anticipate a negative evaluation. It's not like I spilt this display on purpose. I realized that this was a social blunder, and I'm sorry. Okay, so that's all kind of saying the same thing. It's a signal that I realize I've done wrong, and I'm showing you that, and I'm hoping you'll go easy on me, and it tends to work. Others talk about embarrassment as arising when basically whenever I anticipate that there's just been a disruption in smooth social interaction. And that also, if I'm not mistaken, is a multiple choice question. So you might want to put a star by that. Harris talks about it being an example of emotion suppression, but certainly it's obviously experienced as unpleasant, and I guess this is all just saying the same thing. It's a signal to others that I know I've done wrong. I'm sorry. Go light on me. It works. Signs of embarrassment do tend to have people be more likely to forgive you. Research has shown that, as a matter of fact, signs of embarrassment not only make like people more likely to forgive you, but sometimes even people that show embarrassment, it's a sign of humility. And sometimes people even report like an increase in positive evaluation of a person that shows embarrassment. It shows that it's a sign that I care about you. I care about your opinion. I care that you possibly are negative evaluating me, and that matters to me. And so that's interpreted by some people as, they like that. It's a signal that you respect them, and you respect their opinion, and don't want to be in their bad books. And so that's a particularly likely when you're much like maybe sadness. I'd say blushing, a nice example of an analog to blushing is crying. Researchers can't come down on a really good function of blush. Most people that are when they're blushing, experience the increase in unpleasantness that they experience when they're embarrassed, and blushing is greater. People, when you're told you're blushing, it tends to even make you more embarrassed and actually increase your blush response. But you can liken it to why do we cry when we're sad? And researchers are like, doesn't really seem to serve a purpose other than be a sign to people that you're really sad. The same thing for embarrassment. It's really hard. It seems to really facilitate forgiveness, and people really take it as a sign of authentic embarrassment, much like, crying tends to generally is generally authentic. And we can certainly tell when somebody is genuinely crying. It's really hard to fake a blush response. And when people do show blushing, participants would take it as authentic, and are even more likely to not only forgive you, but perhaps improve their opinion of you. As I mentioned, it works. Showing embarrassment works. And when a child shows embarrassment for something they do, they're likely to, their punishment will be less severe than those that, break something in a store and show that they don't care, more likely to receive punishment. And this is all just showing that just generally that this is an effective signal to others. It does solicit sympathy from others. They're more likely to maybe think positive of you. Maybe more, if I show I'm embarrassed because I knocked over that display aisle, a person might actually be more likely to bend over and help me sort of clean it up themselves. And so you can see how just generally a theme here is that really embarrassment is we talked about the social functions of these self-conscious emotions. Well, certainly that's true for embarrassment. It's meant to appease you. It's meant to show you that I'm sorry and that I care about you, that you might be negative evaluating me. And it works. It does not only makes it less likely that we'll be negative evaluated or punished, but it also can repair awkward social situations. Okay. Yes. And so here's a study that sort of supports, there's a couple, it's the same study, a couple of experiments that really show that. What they did was they had participants, Keltner et al. Had participants, they showed them an array of photos like this and went anger, neutral, etc. Shame, embarrassment. Shame, embarrassment, you can see they're very similar facial expressions. It's not culturally universal, but often the sort of the, hand to the face. It's not just lowering of my head, but as well, specifically in our culture and many others, it also involves sort of touching the face and, that's, as you can see, that's kind of the really only thing that's and a little, maybe even a little bit of a smile, but they're very similar facial expressions. But imagine you've just seen this person trip and this is her reaction. Unlikely to be anger unless maybe they broke something, who knows. But shame, embarrassment, amusement, these might be the emotions that you might expect to see, right? And rate how much amusement, sort of like contempt for is antipathy, sort of like not a good, not a positive feeling, content, maybe even like a little bit of disgust, or sympathy on a 7-point scale. And this would be embarrassment, right? This person hasn't done anything wrong to you. This person's just dropped their books or, dropped their drink or something like that. What would you feel if they showed this, if they showed any one of these? And you can see that to the extent that I've done something embarrassing, people are and shown that display of embarrassment following a blunder. This generates mostly, as you can see, it generates a lot of amusement in people. It certainly if I show amusement, if I laugh, then the other person's probably going to laugh. If I show embarrassment, another person is even going to, find it fairly, you've wiped out, you've embarrassed yourself. I might find that somewhat amusing, but certainly I don't feel a little sympathy for you, but I certainly don't feel anything. I don't really have a negative evaluation for you. And to show shame after sort of having some type of wipeout, you can see elicits primarily sympathy. Then they did the same thing, slightly different. Now, imagine you've watched this person give a terrible class presentation. So that might elicit embarrassment in them. And we'll talk about how that might elicit embarrassment in you. It's a unique thing about embarrassment is that it's sort of an empathic emotion, in the sense that, when I see you angry, it doesn't necessarily elicit anger in me. When I see you sad, it doesn't necessarily elicit sadness in me. But when we see somebody embarrassed, we also feel embarrassed. I think you guys can all think of a situation where you thought that. For example, you see somebody struggling through a class presentation, and they're terribly embarrassed, they're beet red. That tends to elicit some embarrassment in us, is what researchers call empathic embarrassment. But same thing here. If showing signs of shame, embarrassment, and finding a laugh in this is after a bad presentation, you can see that if I show shame, it's going to elicit sympathy. So sort of the take-home message is that showing shame and embarrassment when we've sort of committed, in this case, an embarrassment, are arguably shameful. I don't know if there's too much shame in dropping the ball in a class presentation, but you can see how when we do show things like shame, embarrassment, or at least show that we're taking it lightly, that it is associated with positive ratings from other people, and not so much antipathy. You can see that's gone up here a little bit. Again, people are kind of, nobody likes to see, feel like their time's being wasted by, a bad presentation. So antipathy is going, antipathy is going up when a person is showing even embarrassment. But in terms of if you ever find yourself as a defendant in a court case, certainly, given what we just saw, probably not too surprisingly, that if we were to imagine ourselves as the judge or as a juror in a situation where this was we were to imagine the case scenario that these participants had read was, this is a person that's been charged with drug trafficking, and convicted. And so now the thing is, how much time are you going to give them for their drug trafficking, and how much time should go by before we show their first parole? Now, what's interesting about about law is that, for the most part, lawyers tell their clients in criminal cases to actually to remain as neutral in their facial expressions as possible. You can see that that's actually not such great advice. This is because compared to showing like maybe some shame, any of these facial expressions that are designed to guilt, any of those that are designed to elicit appeasement in others, to the extent that I actually show remorse in the form of appeasement on my emotional expression, compared to showing no emotion, actually does predict those jurors or the judge giving me a lesser sentence and a sooner opportunity for first parole. And also, not surprisingly, you don't want to be that person that's been being charged for a criminal offense, and the whole time you're sitting there steaming and showing contempt for the court, right? That just makes people think you deserve a longer sentence and should wait longer for your first parole. So anyway, for those of us that find ourselves on the wrong side of a criminal sentence, the idea is you should show that you're sorry in court, and that's contrary to what I think the most criminal lawyers advocate, which is to show no emotion. Okay. One common feature of all embarrassing experiences is that we seem to feel like we risk being rejected by others because we've committed this basically this social blunder tends to be a common theme throughout situations that elicit anger. And so the question that some researchers ask is, does the feeling of embarrassment actually require a sense of self? Well, I've talked about, well, that's the idea, right? I mean, to feel embarrassed about something that I did, I requires the knowledge that I have a self, a sense of self. Or does it simply require an awareness of other people, right? There's another important part of it is the negative evaluation. What this Sturmedal study had participants do was I don't know what they were doing, but periodically, as you can see, this guy's wearing earphones. Periodically, a loud noise would come out over over these speaker over the headsets, and there's your typical startle response. Specifically, probably like the first time it happened, if you weren't prepared for this startling noise. But most of us, if we did that in front of someone else, it showed that we were really scared. This is sort of maybe our embarrassed smile, like, oh, geez, that was embarrassing. And you sort of just show, much like in that previous study of committed some type of embarrassing behavior. Sometimes you might show some amusement, and that's exactly what's going on here. It's like, oh, I just embarrassed myself, and you smile is sort of a way to express that. These FTLD patients, these are frontotemporal lobar degeneration patients. These are patients that have a brain disease that is eating away at their frontal lobes. It causes a form of dementia that strikes the frontal and temporal lobes, hence frontotemporal lobar degeneration. So this results in dementia from the impairment of those lobes, frontal lobes, and to a lesser extent temporal lobes. And so you can imagine how these participants, well, as a result of this, these participants seem to show much less embarrassment. So while this might be what you and I would do, as after an FTLD patient showed their startle response, they didn't go to this. And so suggesting that they're not embarrassed. I just did this embarrassing thing in front of you, startled, but I don't care. So their startle response isn't followed by this sign of embarrassment, which might be a signal to others that I'm aware that you're out there, and let's just laugh this one off. And not only that, you've got observers saw little evidence of embarrassment and amusement, that amusing smile that we just saw in these frontal lobe patients, even while they watched themselves perform an embarrassing task. The embarrassing task was they were asked to, these are American participants, and they were asked to sing the Star Spangled Banner, which is apparently, at least according to these researchers, was mentioned in this study, a very difficult song to sing well, and to hit the notes properly, so to speak. And so untrained singers, when they're singing it, butcher it is sort of the idea, since it's so difficult to do well, to perform well. And so these are people, these are the ratings of people by judges. Well-controlled participants and these frontal lobe patients are now watching themselves with a researcher on video. You've recorded yourself singing that song, and you've invariably not done a very good job of it. So it should elicit embarrassment in you. It'd be horribly embarrassing for me, because I'm the world's worst singer. And you can see here, there's a significant difference here in terms of the composite when we combine together ratings of judges' ratings of how much amusement you've shown while you were listening to yourself sing this embarrassing song, and the embarrassment that you've shown. When we combine those measures together to create a composite, you get a significant difference, just like you would have predicted. And so, and that's in terms of facial expressions. Raters are saying that these frontal lobe patients, while they're watching themselves with another person sing this song, they don't seem to be showing the critical embarrassment or even the amusement related to the embarrassment. It's just not there. So, at least significantly less so than controlled participants. And so it certainly seems that as these patients, their symptoms of frontal temporal lobar degeneration are having their effects, they seem to be showing less embarrassment. The idea being that their sense of self is being diminished, and so too does their experience of, in this case, embarrassment, at least according to what judges see on their facial expressions. Yeah, this is actually just saying the same thing. This is the group means participants as they watch themselves singing, and again, self-conscious emotions greater in controls than compared to the patients. But as you can see, not a meaningful difference, a big difference in terms of negative emotions or in terms of positive emotions. The only difference was in when we think about the self-conscious emotions in response to an embarrassing, when you're watching yourself perform an embarrassing task. Along with the diminished facial expression, suggesting that they're not feeling any sort of embarrassment or amusement related to that embarrassment. You can see this is time in seconds, and this is just increased physiological responding. I'm not sure exactly what the physiological, what they were measuring physiologically, but you can see as control participants across time, as they're watching this video again in seconds, that they're experiencing physiological arousal, probably as a result of, their embarrassment. The blush response is about, blood being pumped into the face and things like that. And you can see that although it's all over the place here, it's, it's hovering, it's just basically hovering around zero. And that's the patient group. So they're showing less evidence of embarrassment in terms of their facial expression. They're showing less physiological arousal, suggesting that they're also just experiencing less embarrassment compared to controls. I talked about facial expressions of embarrassment. It usually involves essentially like a downward look, but not culturally universally, but in many cultures, it also involves a sort of just touching the mouth, nose, just like her. Other cultures, it doesn't. Other cultures, it's sometimes the embarrassment response involves like a kind of like just kind of not sticking your tongue all the way, but kind of like biting it a little bit. That is some cultures, and it's sort of that happens instead of the hand to the face. But aside from those those differences, the facial expression of embarrassment is remarkably consistent across cultures. So although it is a secondary emotion, it certainly does have a fairly characteristic facial expression, like we consider necessary for any basic emotion. Certainly, this embarrassment expression is functional. Display embarrassment, according to Keltner, it certainly is it's certainly submissive in its appearance. It almost has like a childlike quality to it, and so it causes us to appear more subordinate or submissive to other people, and so in that sense might elicit their appeasement. So it's functional like that. Certainly, the blush response is a very distinctive part of the embarrassment display. But like I said earlier, it's hard to, research is really hard to perplexed as to how it is adaptive or not. Well, it's adaptive in the sense that it's a very clear signal to other people that we are embarrassed, but how it evolved is a bit more of an open-ended question to researchers. Specifically, if you think about how we evolved with basically fur on our face and body, a blush response would be useless. And then even more recently in our evolutionary history, as we evolved from black skin, a blush response would be certainly not evident. And in that sense, it's kind of perplexing to researchers how the blush response sort of became part of the embarrassment display. Today it works, at least on on skin tones that you can see the flushing, blushing of blood in the face, but how it came to be is a bit more of a mystery. As I mentioned already, that embarrassment the blush response is very it's experienced unpleasantly, right? It feels like this sort of face gets hot. And what's also interesting about it is that's just telling people that they're blushing causes them often will cause us to become even more embarrassed. So the blush response in and of itself is embarrassing, despite the fact that it's adaptive, because it's a clear signal to other people, like crying, that my embarrassment, much like my sadness, is authentic. But I talked about how one of the things that's interesting about embarrassment is that when we see others' embarrassment, it's all emotions are to some extent contagious. We talked about emotional contagion. When I see an angry face, I sort of have a micro expression of anger on my face too. But the experience of embarrassment is empathic in the sense that when I see someone embarrassed, it more than just sort of subtly that emotion is sort of subtly contagious in me. It becomes much more conscious. And these are participants that are watching a student or at least a peer really butcher a like a class presentation. And to the extent that they had no chance. It was like they're going to go in and give a speech on something that they had no time to prepare for. So they're almost invariably going to be embarrassed, as they almost can't do a good job. And so certainly to the extent that they felt that the observers, this is the perceiver, so I'm audience, I'm like, oh yeah, that person that was giving that speech and really dropping the ball, they really looked embarrassed. They really looked embarrassed. That's correlated with my self-reported embarrassment, and as well this empathic embarrassment. So basically, to the extent that I'll also feel embarrassed. And as I mentioned, I think we've all had that situation where we see somebody just really just fumbling through something. It's uncomfortable to see. It's uncomfortable to see someone embarrassed in a for a prolonged period of time, and it actually we start to actually feel embarrassed as well. Just like anything else, we talked about, sometimes the same situation might induce anger in one person, and that same situation might induce amusement in another person. So the individual differences in the types of things that elicit emotions, and embarrassment is no different. Self-reports of embarrassment are positively correlated to neuroticism. So my proneness to experience negative affect, like anxiety and sort of depression. Those people that have higher levels of neuroticism also report higher, more frequent experiences with embarrassment. That's probably not too surprising. Susceptibility to embarrassment, also probably not too surprisingly, that research has shown it's positively related to just all kinds of these other sort of, negative sort of psychosocial experiences, social anxiety and shyness and loneliness. And conversely, it correlates negatively with extroversion. Extroverts are less likely to experience embarrassment, and people that are high in self-esteem report less experiences with embarrassment compared to those that higher in social anxiety and shyness and loneliness. Well, we saw how disgust was an emotion that did have a gender difference. We saw that women were more likely to experience disgust than men. That's not the case for embarrassment. Men and women are equally likely, self-report equal frequencies of, on a daily basis or monthly basis, weekly basis of experiences with embarrassment. Okay, so I separated embarrassment a little from shame and guilt. It's although the three of them are very similar. Embarrassment, as I said, it's more about, I realize it's my recognition to you that I've done something wrong, but it's not been an ill to you. Shame and guilt really are about, I'm feeling like this and showing you that I feel like this because I recognize I have done something to you. Okay, so I feel this is about usually feel like I've performed a moral wrong. I may feel shame for drunk driving or something. I failed to live up to, say, my parents' expectations or my own expectations. That might be something that would elicit might elicit guilt. Again, shame is the one that's more likely. I'm more likely to feel shame when I realize I've done something wrong and I feel like it's because I'm bad. Guilt is more likely to be experienced when I've done something wrong. But I feel like that was just a bad behavior, but not necessarily a reflection of me as a person. Okay, and that's what I see here, and I'm very confident that these two bullets here together make up a multiple choice question on the exam as well. So people can, in addition to these being a distinction between what's the type of action or behavior that's more likely to elicit shame, one unless I interpret as a reflection of me, one that's more likely to elicit guilt is one that's more likely to make elicit in me a feeling that I've done something wrong. My behavior was wrong, but not me. People tend to sort of maybe be more prone to interpreting bad behavior as a reflection of the self, and so become shame prone, versus those that commit some type of ill will and just say, oh, it was just a bad move, and are therefore more likely to be more guilt prone than shame prone. There's differences between people that are guilt and shame prone. Shame prone people have more relationship problems with guilt prone people. Shame prone people, basically shame proneness, according to Covert, it implies a low sense of control over one's own outcomes. It's just like, there's nothing I can do. This is just me. I'm always blowing it. I'm always, doing something wrong that affects negative people, or affects other people negatively. And there's really nothing I can do about it. That's going to imply, there's, low perceived control. And that's going to be more characteristic of a person that's shame prone. A guilt prone person is more likely to say, well, I can control it. I won't do that again, right? It's not something that is a reflection of me. It was just a bad move I made. I won't make that mistake again. But Tagny et al. Suggest that one of the reasons why shame-prone people do have more relationship problems with people is because of these reasons, right? They attribute these negative outcomes to global and importantly stable. So this describes me, the whole self, and this is not going to change. And so that explains their low sense of control, right? This is me, and this is always going to be me. But moreover, they feel that other people evaluate them negatively, but since they feel like this is out of their control, they feel that that's not fair. They feel a strong sense of other people's disapproval, and get angry about that because they don't feel like that's fair. They feel that, like, I've done this, but it's almost like there's nothing I can do about it. So you shouldn't be mad at me. Your disapproval is sort of unwarranted. Where a guilt-prone person that feels like they have more control over things is more willing to take responsibility, and so therefore not feel like other people's disapproval is unwarranted. And so researchers believe that's really why, it really describes why shame-prone people have these problems. They're angry because they feel like the negative evaluation that they get from people that induces this shame, the shame that they feel, is unfair to them because there's really nothing they can do about it. Okay, and that these two bullets are just saying that. Okay, shame. Again, I always like to, Reeve always has a sort of almost like a single adjective or descriptor to describe each of these basic emotions. And so how he described shame is that if any emotion could be called a bad emotion, he says it's shame. And the idea is that, it's hard to suggest there are any bad emotions, because if you buy into the basic emotions argument of the universal or innate camp, then the emotions can't be bad because they're functional. They've evolved in us because they're functional, and in that sense are adaptive and are good. Reeve says, well, that might be the case. If you were to ever think of emotion as being bad, maybe we could think shame as being the best example. It's associated with feelings of inferiority, sense of worthlessness, a global and stable, as we saw, damaged self-image. Okay, yeah, so just this feelings of inadequacy, worthlessness, very sort of, as you can see, very reminiscent, very similar to feelings of depression almost. What does it do in the sense of how is it functional? Well, certainly it's functional in the sense that it motivates us to engage in a type of behavior that is designed to restore a positive evaluation in other people. We've committed a moral violation or some display of incompetence, what have you, and we feel like that's damaging to the self. But it certainly hopefully motivate us to not do those things, try to not do those things again, or at least engage in behavior that's designed to repair the damage in the eyes of other people, or even in our own eyes. And so in that sense, you can think about the function of shame as being like a moral barometer. Again, much like the affective information hypothesis, to the extent that I'm experiencing shame, I can take that as feedback that things aren't going very well. I've committed something, an immoral act, or I failed to live up to my own standards of excellence, or another person's standards of excellence. The book also refers to sort of two types of shame, what they refer to as the dual motivational model of shame. Well, in the book, there's a citation by DeHuge et al. In 2010, and it says that shame, according to those researchers, shame produces the urge to hide or withdraw, and sort of, get out of the way of somebody that's probably thinking we've done something wrong. But it gives rise to actually two motives, they say. In addition to the motive to withdraw, and in that sense, protect the self. So there's your avoidance response. It also motivates us to attempt to restore the self in the sense of in the eyes of others, in the eyes of ourselves. And so it has an avoidance component, and this is hence the dual motivational model. There is the component of it, the motivation to withdraw and get out of the situation, but there's also the motivation to take action to try and remedy and rectify, or what they call restore, what the dual motivational model of shame calls restore. So do recall that for the exam as well. The two, according to the dual motivational model of shame, it motivates avoidance behavior, withdrawal, but as well it motivates approach behavior designed to repair the damage. Okay. As Reeves says, guilt lacks the negative intensity of shame. So that's another way, at least that the textbook distinguishes guilt and shame. Not, shame, importantly, being an interpretation that the self globally and stably is bad. Guilt being an interpretation that our behavior was just bad, but it doesn't mean we can't fix it in the future, or that it's an indication of us on a global level. It's just we did something wrong. Reeves says that guilt lacks, so in that sense, Reeves says that guilt lacks the negative intensity, emotional intensity that shame does. It arises after the person negatively evaluates their behavior, as I've mentioned, but not the self. It's not a global negative evaluation. It produces thoughts that focus on the hurt and the distress caused to a relationship partner. In that sense, but as well, it has that sort of restorative component like shame does. And it sort of also causes us to not only focus on the harm we've done, but also focus on what we could do to hopefully reconcile that, or correct those the hurt that we've caused someone else. Again, if you want to think about the affect as information hypothesis, or signal value of emotions, Reeves suggests that guilt serves as a functional signal, or in this case, emotional marker of that there's been, a social connection of ours, a valued social connection of ours has been sort of compromised and needs repair. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. And then finally, pride. So we're finish on a positive note. Yeah, to include our discussion of self-conscious emotions, to include our discussion of emotions in general, the course in general. We'll finish here with pride. And pride is defined by, at least by Tracy and Robbins. And Tracy does the lion's share of the research in this. A lot of the seminal research was done by that researcher. Says that we feel pride, or defines pride as the emotion we feel when we take credit for something for a positive outcome. We take credit for something good, and we believe that it reflects positively on our self-concept. Quite the opposite then of things like a shameful emotional experience, right? We feel that behavior reflects negatively on our self-concept. Feelings of pride boost self-esteem. When I feel pride, not surprisingly, I feel better about myself. And in terms of signal value, it's a signal to us that we're doing good, and that others should sort of respect us, and that it's sort of we associate expressions of pride and even subjective feelings of pride with high status, and sort of related to this increase in self-esteem. It sort of makes me feel like I've increased my status in a social situation, and I'm more worthy of acceptance to the extent that I feel like I've done something prideful. And so, yeah, a lot of research has suggested that pride is critically associated with high status. When I see someone showing pride, somewhat similar to when I see someone expressing controlled anger. Controlled anger and pride are similar in that how we interpret that in other people is that must, that's a person of high status. They're just sort of walking around with that air about them that suggests that they're high status. And not surprising, sort of along the lines of how the facial expressions, like Darwin said, are sort of no accident. They're about fearful facial expressions are about curtailing sensory acquisition. Enhancing sensory acquisition, and disgust about curtailing it. You can see how sort of it's not surprising that the pride facial expression really is about blowing ourselves up, right? Much like, when animals are, sort of ready to fight or trying to perhaps avoid a fight, they expand themselves to suggest that they're bigger or stronger, maybe than they would ordinarily appear. Same thing, that same expansive type posture is associated with pride. It just sort of suggests to other people that we're like, we're blown up, we're all puffed up. And so you can imagine, this is sort of the prideful expression you might see after, winning a sporting event or something. But another version of it is, just sort of just again, puffing out our chest, and often, it's the head will rise. Certainly the opposite of, down, if the face facing downward, like for example, in a shameful or an embarrassment facial expression. But this expansive posture is designed, as a matter of fact, attracts attention. Not only is it associated, do people think, whoa, you must be pretty good and you must have some high status. It also serves that by being bigger, it makes us more visible to people, and in that sense attracts attention. Although I am presenting pride as motion scientists would, as a self-conscious emotion. In that sense, one that would require at least some minimal amount of development. You can see that, certainly a sense of self might be emerging around that time anyway. But even as young as 4 years old, children can correctly do know what a pride expression looks like. Certainly, that's true with U.S. adults. It's true in other countries, and in less developed countries as well. So it's fairly the expression. This is a pride facial expression. Is distinguishable, accurately recognized, I should say, in people all around the world, and in even fairly young children. Probably those that would pass the Rouge test, as I mentioned earlier. And sort of along those lines, to suggest that maybe it's sort of approaching having essentially a universal, almost maybe moving closer to having some sort of an innate component. The pride expression, at least this version of it, the arms up after, say, winning a competition, is not learned. These are blind. This is just happens to be a congenitally blind athlete. So this woman, would have never seen, blind since birth, would have never seen anything, never mind a prideful expression, in this case, bodily expression. And yet after winning judo or karate, I think this is Olympics, but it doesn't matter, in competition. I mean, sorry, that's sighted. This is blind. I can't even read my own labels here. You can see that this man who has never seen a prideful expression, automatically being told he won. This is the posture that he assumes, and so it seems to be an innate posture, an innate facial expression. And this last study shows how we associate pride with high status. Participants were shown either a prideful expression like this or a gray screen, very briefly. It'd be enough that they would be able to see it. It wouldn't be like very clear. It's still less than 1/10 of a second. So it is basically just a little more than a flash. But then it's quickly, you guys know I talked about masking. Then there's show this to basically make sure that now you're no longer seeing it. Like, when you're like looking out a window and then you close your eyes and you can basically still see the window outline and on your eyelid. That's visible persistence, right? The masking would prevent that. So if they didn't put the mask up, even though they took that away, the image would still be like burned into your retina. And so the mask almost is like the wiping a chalkboard clean. That's what the mask serves as. And then you're shown a painting. It's an abstract painting, again, briefly, but it's clearly visible. It's superliminal. It's not subliminal. But then that's masked too. And you have to report whether this painting it's a either or. It's a high status response. You think that this is, like, one way to put it is, do you think this is an expensive painting, what they call the high status painting, or not? And so sometimes a painting that you were going to report was high or low status was followed by a kind of subliminal presentation of a prideful facial expression in a basically, or a subliminal presentation of nothing. And each of these diamonds here are participants. And here, as you can see, is chance. What we're measuring is the proportion of high status responses following pride expressions. And 3 out of 4, so it's only, these people are just as likely to say high, these two are just as likely to say they're at chance, high status after a prideful expression as they were after a gray screen. These people are showing a marginal, they're showing the effect in the opposite direction, but there's just a few of them. 3 out of 4 participants, starting here, and all of these participants are showing, some of them quite dramatically, showing a bias to say high status. That painting looks like it's expensive. I bet you that painting is high status and expensive. I'm going to hit that button if it had followed the prideful expression then after the gray screen. And so what the Sheriff and Tracy study is showing is that we implicitly associate pride with status. When I see a painting temporally contiguous to a prideful facial expression, I sort of infuse that prideful facial expression into the painting and decide that must be an expensive, high status painting. Oh, and yeah, I think this is my last study. Yeah, this is the last study I wanted to mention. People that these were participants that were led to believe they were performing 2 tasks. In one task they performed, and that was their feedback task. And in their feedback, they were induced into a prideful state because regardless of how they actually performed, their feedback that they got was that, wow, like you're really good. All right, so that's you're now a person that should be feeling prideful because you're just told you're way above average in your performance in this task. Okay, or other participants were in a neutral state, neutral target. So it was just like, you're performing this task and I'm not giving you any feedback. Then we go into part 2 of the experiment, and you're actually interacting with another person. And what we're measuring here on the y-axis is that other person's rating of your likability as an interaction partner. And you can see that people that had been in falsely, I mean, regardless of how you actually performed, you were told you performed really well. So people that were induced into pride were more likable than people that had not been induced into pride. And so, well, you can imagine in this next slide, I'm going to show there's certainly a dark side to pride. We don't like people that are too full of themselves. Feeling pride, feeling the positive affect that's associated with pride, does actually make people find us to be more pleasant to be around, more pleasant to interact with. However, as I mentioned, here's Tracy again. Tracy and Robin suggest that it is pride in itself is a sort of a complex emotion that has a dual nature. The pride that we just saw, right? That's, you were told, although it might not have necessarily been true, it was authentic pride. You were just told that you performed really well, and were led to believe that, you had achieved well. And as a matter of fact, actually, in that there was a second part. Yeah, they played a more dominant role. It's not shown here, but they actually, they just sort of tackled this problem better. They took on the dominant role in this group problem solving task, but they weren't that taking of control was perceived positively. Right? People are like, oh yeah, he took control, but as a matter of fact, he was a likable person. It wasn't like he was bossing us around and telling us what to do. And so that might be, there's the achievement behavior, the increase in self-esteem, and pro-social behaviors. That's what we were just talking about. Authentic pride, according to Tracy and Robbins, the good side of pride. But they say there's a downside, there's a dark side to pride, hubris. Pride, hubris is like massive, like just overconfidence. You really think it's basically, hubris is a lot like narcissism. And that, unfortunately, is not a good thing. This is that type of pride, that sort of bragging, sort of inflated sense of self, that narcissistic type pride that they call hubris pride, is quite the opposite. That's instead of being associated with pro-social behaviors, it's quite on the contrary, associated with antisocial behavior. And we know nobody likes a narcissist, so they're certainly not going to be getting this favorable liking rating if you're a person that your pride seems to be more about narcissism than just basically you feeling a high level of self-esteem for a job well done. And so that's also certainly a multiple choice question. That is the end of the lecture. That is the end of the course. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and good luck. Oh boy, I missed a lot here. I'll finish the lecture here. Anybody I missed? I'm sorry, I missed a lot of questions here, so I'll hang around and answer those questions. But good luck on the exam on Wednesday. I will get that marked ASAP. Should have that to you by the end of the marks by the end of the week, and I'll get to your papers, and with the goal of having those to you at some point the following week.
I just had sorry.